I hope you can all hear me. I brought a little guest. Chloe, say hi. Say hi, Chloe. Yep, smile so big the passy falls out. So she should go to sleep here shortly, but I kept her up so she can say hi. Alrighty, so I have a long list of questions here that I printed out and marked up, but I also have a number. If you want to send in any additional questions, you can text me at this number, 623-666-2118. So I have that right in front of me here on my tablet, and you can text me at that number. Otherwise, I'm just going to go through this. I know I didn't pick the phone number. I didn't even notice that until today that has 666 in it. So I didn't pick that. All right, so I'm going to just get right into the questions that were sent in on the blog after I get Chloe put on the breast for nap time. All right, so if you are following along with the questions on the blog, this is going back a couple of posts when I first announced the live Q&A. There's like 92 or 93 comments on that thread. I'm going through those in the order in which they were sent in. So if you can follow along there, that should be in the right order. All right, so I'm going to get started right here. This question came up about, do I ever deal with jealousy, envy, or insecurity due to the very sexualized world we live in? And a similar question later on that I'm going to answer with this one, just because it was so similar, dealt with the same thing with my husband traveling. Am I ever jealous about that? I want to kind of park it on that for a minute, because I think that as wives, we can really hinder our husband's life and life's calling by being an overly attached, envious, jealous wife. Now, jealousy in and of itself is a good characteristic. I'm not saying not to be jealous of our spouses. But the level of jealousy that this comment is talking about, envy and insecurity due to the very sexualized world we live in, that's kind of taken it to an extreme, because of course Jesus said that he doesn't want us taken out of the world. He wants us to stay in the world. He just doesn't want us to be tainted by the world. So that we would keep ourselves from the evil in the world. And especially just, in light of things that have recently transpired, I think it is really destructive to a marriage for a wife to be overly jealous or envious and to make herself too dependent on her husband. Now, a wife is to be the helper for the husband, not the other way around. So anytime we have a balance in life where the husband has to pander to the wife and he has to revolve his schedule around his wife so that she doesn't go off the rails mentally and emotionally and her insecurities, those roles are really reversed, where now it becomes the husband's job in life to make sure that his wife isn't going to lose the plot. So while jealousy in and of itself is a good attribute, we should be jealous of what we have, as in we want to be possessive of our spouse and not share them with another. No, that should not be taken to an extreme, and I think a far greater danger that I see in this day and age is women taking that too far, wanting to just keep their husband on a really short leash, dictating his life, dictating his schedule, manipulating him by, acting helpless and like they just need him for the most mundane aspects of life. I think there's a real danger there, and it will not be for the betterment of the marriage. I hope that answers that question. The fact that the comment mentions this overly sexualized world, a married man who is happily married is not just on the brink of committing adultery all the time. So since, let's talk about other lusts of the flesh, and like hunger or appetite. There's a righteous way to fulfill that. So, to the hungry soul, every bitter thing is sweet. If you're really, really starved, something gross is going to start sounding good to you. I mean, if you haven't eaten in days and you come across McDonald's, you're probably going to want to buy it because it's going to sound appealing after 2 days of no eating. And it's kind of like that in marriage. if your husband is starved for physical affection and that aspect of marriage, there is a greater danger that he might seek to fulfill that, in unrighteous ways, or that he would be more tempted, when he sees a woman and she's maybe dressed inappropriately or provocatively. There would be then more of a challenge of not letting that affect him. But most husbands are not just about to commit adultery and they're just one step away from adultery. There are a lot of other things wrong in the marriage besides just, these women being too scantily clad. So keeping the husband happy at home is a big step. And I'm not saying that if the husband commits adultery, that's the wife's fault, because it's not. But, that's just a good preventative measure in general. So I hope that answers that question. I'm moving on to the next question now. How did you get your heart's attitude right with being at home and the daily tasks of raising children, keeping the home? And this mom was asking because she said she does not feel satisfied and longs for different opportunities and struggles with contentment. And one commenter already responded, and I thought it was a very good answer, because the other lady already said that you can use any skills, even professional ones, in the sphere of influence of the home. And that is very, very true, and that's exactly what I was going to say, that even just because you're only staying home with your children, you can use those same skills at home to benefit your family as opposed to strangers and outsiders that are not part of your family. I know many moms that are expert cake decorators or expert at whatever they do, and in fact the fact that they do stay home with their children frees them up to be able to learn and advance. And I would strongly encourage any lady to always learn and work on improving yourself mentally and just in learning new skills. You have great intelligence and you can really make that work for you. You can pursue new hobbies and interests just through reading new books, taking online courses, pursuing hobbies outside the home, and then really implementing that. For instance, I really enjoy baking, bread baking, and I've perfected my artisan bread baking to make loaves that you could buy from an artisan bakery if they were for sale, or in the sphere of cooking, maybe a high-end chef in town could prepare a steak dinner like I like to make. And I think that because it's not seen on the outside, sometimes we think those skills are lost. I recently took up a hobby. I'm not going to elaborate on. It's actually a professional branch that I'm taking an online course for that is a field that will greatly benefit in my husband's ministry. It's not anything that is seen. I'm not even talking about it on here in detail what it is, but it's something that's behind the scenes. So just because it's not seen, because we are at home and because only our family reaps the fruits of our work, it is still very satisfying. That satisfaction and that contentment that comes from a job well done, even though it's just for our family, can still be there. So I would really encourage you, if you're struggling with staying home and you're struggling with contentment, use that time to advance yourself, on an intellectual level and on a skill level, and it will contribute to your contentment. I'm going to check the tablet here real quick because it looks like somebody has sent me something. Okay, so somebody's asking about tongue ties. I'm going to shelve that for a minute just because there was a question about tongue ties, and I will talk about that in a little bit more detail. We were dealing with tongue ties in the last 6 months with 2 of our children. So I will mention that when I get to that question. And then another question about when and how I assign chores to my children. Which jobs do you assign? Is it gender specific? That's a wide-sweeping question. I do not assign any gender-specific chores. All of our kids learn to do all the chores because it's all basic things that everybody needs for life. Everybody needs to know how to operate a washing machine and a dishwasher, how to sweep a floor, how to sort laundry, how to, do basic care of a child, you know, as far as getting them dressed for the day or getting them ready for bed or helping prepare a meal, just the day-to-day reading with a younger child. There's so many things that really both fathers and mothers should know. Therefore, I'm teaching them to my sons and my daughters. I don't have any gender-specific chores. There are children who enjoy certain chores more than others or are better at certain chores, so I'm not just in the business of making sure to assign the most undesirable chore to the child who hates that the most, but in general, everybody has to do everything and learn everything. And how that looks at my house will be different from how that looks at your house, because each of us has a different way of running a household, when our kids nap, what our resources and our circumstances are. So I have a lot of schedules for chores on my blog if you search for that, but really you would have to adapt it to your own needs, because your needs will be very different from my needs as far as what we have in our household. I'm going to go back to the questions online again, and one more time, that number, if you want to text in, is 623-666-2118. And that will pop up on a tablet here next to me. And this little girl is asleep. Anonymous said she has a 20-month-old baby girl that's very clingy, terrified if anyone else tries to talk to her or hold her. And mom is asking, should I give in to her every time she cries? Or should I force her to go with other relatives? I would say never force your child to go with relatives or other people that they're not comfortable with. I'm not one who believes in giving kids what they're crying for, but this is a different area. This is if a child feels uncomfortable with certain people, I would never force them to go with those people, just because it sets a bad example of, if there is ever concern about a relative, they should be able to come to you and feel comfortable and know that you will back them up. They cannot be forced to physically go with somebody that they're not comfortable with, and that's an important lesson to teach them. Besides that, it will also just reinforce the insecurity that the child is already struggling with. So no, I would not force the child to go to other people and force that on them. The next question was asking about what type of work is Solomon doing? What age will he finish homeschooling? What can a young man like him do for work? So let me go through that one at a time. I don't want to talk about the specifics of his job, because I know there are people who would harass his workplace. So he is working in an office type environment, doing work on the computer. The laws are different in each state. In the state of Arizona, you're allowed to start work when you're 14. So you would want to look at the laws in your specific state. The child labor laws are different in every state. Even at age 14, there's only certain jobs that 14-year-olds are allowed to do, and there's very specific rules about what they can and can't do, what kind of machinery they can and can't operate. So you want to look into that. There was a funny story when Solomon was going around applying for jobs. He was applying at one place of business, and he had put on a schedule that he was not available on Sundays because we have church on Sundays. I mean, he didn't say that. He just said he wasn't available on Sundays. And the proprietor asked him, "Oh, you go to church?" And Solomon said, "Yes, I go to church. My dad's a pastor." And the man asked him, "Oh, what church is it?" And Solomon said, "Faithful Baptist Church in Tempe." And he's like, "Is that Pastor Anderson?" And Solomon was like, "Yes, that's my dad." And it turned out the gentleman had actually heard sermons, had listened to sermons online, and was local to our area. He goes to a different church in the area. There are actually a lot of people who listen to the sermons but go to different churches in the area. And he was thrilled, and he wanted to hire Solomon, but his boss over him said he had to wait until he was 15. So he said, "You come back on your 15th birthday, I will hire you on the spot." But by then Solomon had the job that he currently has, so he didn't want to go with that one. But I thought that was a funny anecdote. The other question here that was connected with that is this lady also said that with all the activities and after school and sports, her son has no time for work. And I understand that the schedule is different when your children are in public school versus homeschool. Solomon is in his junior year of high school, so he only has this year next left, and he already has most of his high school credits. He's only taking 3 courses this year, so his schoolwork does not take up. He can get all his schoolwork done in like a day and a half. So his hours are restricted, of course, but beyond that, he also is very flexible because of his homeschool schedule. So I would say make work a priority over youth ministry and activities, even extracurricular sports and things like that. I would say, since your son is not going to be a professional athlete, he would do better to work on his career or his work now than to pursue just all this extracurricular sports. The other thing is that there's a lot of dead time that we all have. So by having work and then fitting all your, if you put in the big rocks first and then you fill the little rocks around it, work should be one of the big rocks. Church should be one of the big rocks, and then fill the activities around it. If you fill the jar with all the little pebbles of activities, of course the big rock of work is no longer going to fit in it. But you put the big rocks in first and then you fill it with the pebbles, if that makes sense. A question about potty training, at what age and when they are completely trained. So I have fully potty trained 7 of the 9 children. Boaz is learning now, and he will be 3 in May, so he's 2 years and 8 months. I'm not exactly the most ambitious potty trainer, if there's such a thing. I typically like to keep them in diapers until they're like, okay, I need to go to the bathroom, and they're able to understand that and communicate that, and then potty training is pretty fast and easy and painless. Just because I have a lot of kids that I'm taking care of every day, I don't really have time for my toddler to pee on the floor, have an accident, need to be showered down, all that kind of stuff. So I typically hold off on the potty training until there's good communication skills. So that's going to look different for everybody. I usually typically potty train around age 3. By the time they're 3, they're usually fully potty trained. I will say the fully potty trained does not always mean that they're dry overnight. So even when they're potty trained during the daytime, they might still need to wear like the pull-ups at night for longer than that. Tips for teething. The husband doesn't allow teething tablets or gum-numbing stuff. There's other things you can do. I have, for the last several children, starting with Anna, used amber teething necklaces. I find those very helpful. So that would be my first tip. Anna, Stephen, Boaz, and Chloe have all used them with great success. Chloe is teething right now, in fact, and she's just been wearing it nonstop for probably the last 3 or 4 months. Other things you can do that our kids have always liked is chew on frozen stuff, especially like frozen waffles. That works. Another thing is if you rub their gums, when their gums are hurting, you rub them. It makes the baby mad initially because it hurts. But if you rub their gums, I don't want to say hard, but do press on them. Even though it hurts, it will then afterward, it numbs the area because the nerves kind of just shut down. So rubbing their gums, even though they fight it afterward, feels better. Next question, have I ever considered going vegan or vegetarian? No. If I could only ever have one kind of meat for the rest of my life, it would be pork. So no, never going vegan or vegetarian. I was sad to see the chickens go. Yeah, we were too. It's nice though because we have our poolside back to ourselves now, and I've been able to plant I put in several fruit trees and berry shrubs and things in that area, and they are actually all coming in wonderfully. So I don't know, that fertilizer from the chickens in the ground really has helped. So I'm excited about that. I'm going to switch to the tablet again here for a minute. Could I explain graven images a bit? Is it wrong to have a decorative wooden duck since it's an animal? I'm going to try to stay away. I know that I'm on here speaking and teaching in a way. I prefer not to answer in too much detail questions that are like pertaining to the Bible. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but those videos on YouTube always rub me the wrong way, where a woman is like explaining the Bible and going into great detail. So I would say, when in doubt, throw it out. A graven image of a duck, I don't know, a wooden thing of a duck. I don't have a decoration like that. If you think it's wrong because it's graven and wood, I definitely would say get rid of it. I guess it's a bird technically, since it's a duck. That really, I would think, is between you and the Lord, but if you're having doubts about it, I would take it out. I'm not real big on decorations. There's another question on that later on, so I'll answer that right now too. What kind of decorations do I have in the house? I would say very minimal. My goal is to just try to get the house not to look disheveled, so my decorating style is pick up messes, and beyond that, I think it's just what the kids' pictures they draw and little artwork they make and little bits and things they put out for me. So eclectic, that's my decorating style. But no, we don't have any figurines or anything like that. How do I handle the children in the service around 15 months old? Our little one is getting louder as he gets older. So 15 months old, I would say between 8 and 18 months is when children typically have a hard time staying in the service. And that's the time that a mother-baby room comes in very helpful. If you don't have one, sitting toward the back of the auditorium, or maybe in the foyer if your church has one, is going to be the best solution. Because starting around 8 months, kids can crawl, they can get around. They make noises. Now, some kids are louder than others. I think Miriam I never had to take out. She's always been really quiet in the service, and she wouldn't crawl off. Other kids, they like to screech and throw toys and climb on everything. So 15 months old, I would not expect to stay in the service and be quiet. I would expect to have to step out with them. And there's not really much you can do about that. I would say I would not expect a child to sit through the service until they get to be 2 years old, 24 months. At a minimum, and even then, would still need to leave sometimes. How do I prepare my sons for the working world? Make them work at home. Expect a lot of them. Children will live up to whatever you expect of them, pretty much. If your expectations are low, what they deliver will be low. And if you have high expectations and you expect them to work hard and to be diligent, they will do that. So the best way you can prepare them for that is to have them work around the house, to have them participate in productive hobbies and pursuits. And I'm not saying that every waking minute needs to be work, because all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. But, you know, they shouldn't just have tons and tons of mindless free time to veg and be lazy. And while I'm on that, no video games is a great tool for that, to making sure that kids aren't just sitting and being lazy. Our children are allowed, our older children that are good readers, so that's really just the 3 oldest boys, are allowed time playing video games only once per week on Sunday afternoons, and it's on like the lego.com site. They have some jump and runs. So they're very limited in what they can play. They also have a little like handheld Tetris. No game stations. We will never have a game station in our house. Nothing of that sort. It's just, you know, I don't even have a single game app on my phone, although I know in the past we've had like a race car one or something like that. So by severely limiting that to, okay, you get an hour on Sunday afternoons, that way they're not asking me throughout the week, can I get on the computer? Can I play? Can I do that? They know it's a non-issue, and they're not learning that their only entertainment is an electronic format. So that way even their play is productive and teaching them skills, even though it's not technically work, which will in turn prepare them. For instance, we've had children that really enjoy the outdoors. They enjoy building things and growing stuff. So even though it's fun time, they are still learning valuable skills. Whereas being on the computer, playing video games, there's no skills for life learned there. So just lots of skills in everyday life that they can take with them. If a child leaves the home and begins to live in fornication, would God want us to separate from them just as anyone else in the world? Yes. If they're claiming to be a Christian, if your child says, I'm a Christian, I'm born again, and they're living in fornication, the Bible makes it very clear that we are to separate from any brother that walks unruly, that is, a railer or a drunkard or a fornicator or a covetous person. And that includes your children. And that's not popular, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of flack for saying that. Besides just the fact that, kids knowing that that's the consequence will help keep them on the straight and narrow. I mean, think about how many Mormons there are, or how many Amish and Mennonite there are that don't leave their false religion because they know that if they do, their entire family will ostracize them. And that works as a great incentive to keeping them in their false religion. Of course, it doesn't help their soul. But there is a strong draw there to not want to break family ties. And you will do the right thing because you don't want to pay for it by being cut off from fellowship with your family. I'm not saying not to spend any time with them, but it should be very limited, and it should be, the Bible says not to even eat with them. So it's not a thing where you fellowship with them. It's just a thing of you keep a thread with that child, but you're not celebrating holidays with them, you're not inviting them over, these kinds of things. Now, of course, I don't have an adult child, so somebody could say, well, how do you know you don't have that? And it is true, I don't. I'm sure it would be very difficult. But the Bible is true regardless of whether or not I've personally had to experience such a situation. Besides that, the other factor is that more than just with a Christian who's backslidden off of the street, when it's your own family, you might have younger children in the home that are going to follow the oldest sibling. And if you think of the oldest sibling as like being the engine on a train and all the other kids behind it are, more cars behind that same engine, it is really, really important how that first child turns out because they're kind of setting the tracks, as it were. And if that first child, that oldest child already goes off the rails, there's a greater chance that the second one will. And when the second one does, there's an even greater chance that the third one will, and so on. Whereas if you have somebody who's leading the way, and firstborns are typically, leaders and assertive. If you have the firstborn and they set a good pattern, then it's easier for the next person to follow in their tracks, and they don't have to blaze a new trail. So just because of that, it's also important if you have a child that is living a wicked life, that is living in a way that you would not want your other children to follow. I do believe it is crucial that you strongly and strictly restrict the access that they have to younger children, because the sin can have a certain appeal, and it when children go through their teen years and they're awkward and they're questioning, then of course a rebellious teen sibling who seems to be enjoying the pleasures of sin for a season might seem more appealing than fuddy-duddy mom and dad. So I would be very, very cautious with that. So if they leave the home, I would severely restrict the fellowship with them, yes. I'm going to answer a couple more questions that were from the blog, and I'm going to go back to the text messages. If you want to text, this is the number. I'm holding Chloe here. She's asleep. So if I'm sitting awkward, that's why. 623-666-2118. And I do have my sling here, so maybe I'll try moving her to the sling as I'm talking. Okay, so here was a religious question, and it's going to tie in with a later question. Is it appropriate to teach men the gospel to get them saved? And then later on, there is another question about should women, if they are leading somebody to the Lord, is it okay? What if that somebody wants to get baptized immediately? Should women baptize them? So no, I do not believe women should baptize converts, because that's something that the offices of the church do, and women are not to be offices in the church. As far as soul winning, yes, I do believe ladies should go soul winning. We are not to teach in church, teach from the Bible in church, but preaching the gospel is something that we're all commanded. Children can do that, and of course, we wouldn't expect a child to preach in the church. Women can do that. Anybody can do that. What do you and your family do for drinking water? Okay, so we get bottled water. It's asking about a certain brand. I can only recommend this for Phoenix, Arizona. We get Sparkletts water. I know Sparkletts works with different companies all throughout the country, so my Sparkletts water is not what that of somebody in California or Nevada might be. In Phoenix, where we live, the Sparkletts water comes from a deep protected well in Phoenix that's kind of been like this county island for the last 100 years. It comes up perfectly clean. We have tested the water. Paul Wittenberger, for his movie Poison on Tap, tested many, many brands of water. Sparkletts was one of 2 waters that came back as having no fluoride in it. Perfectly clean. Everything else had high levels of fluoride. I know Arrowhead water, which I've always hated the taste of, had like twice as much fluoride in it as nursery water, which nursery water is that scam where you buy fluoridated water for your baby, you know, so you can poison them from an early age. So we use Sparkletts, but you would have to do your own research for your area. In Phoenix, I can highly recommend them. And if you're members of Costco, they have a special deal for Costco members for water delivery. And we use the 5-gallon bottles with a water cooler. So we have 2 water coolers now. And we go through approximately 32 bottles every 28 days. So just over 1 5-gallon bottle per day. I use it for everything, cooking and drinking, obviously. There's a lot of water going on in our house because the kids are, you know, forever getting into it. What kind of car seat or stroller do I use? That's non-toxic, ideally. So when this reader means non-toxic, they're predominantly probably referring to flame retardants. Everything, all soft furnishings are over-treated with flame retardants. And car seats are no exception to that. Especially baby stuff is so oversprayed. The car seat I use right now, I hate. This is the first time I switched to this brand. I like the stroller. I think it's Baby Trend. I like their stroller. So I thought, oh, I'll go with a car seat for it this time. I hate it. I will be going back to Graco. I like the Graco car seats. However, they're not non-toxic. Now, somebody commented on here that the Upper Baby Mesa Henry, the only fabric in the line that's non-toxic. So if by the time, Lord willing, if I have another baby, there is a non-toxic car seat out there, I will be switching brands. As far as convenience and safety, I've always liked the Graco ones. But if there's a non-toxic, I will definitely switch to that and look into that. So hopefully that's just something that's a field that's opening up more and more as information on the toxicity of flame retardants is becoming widely known. Last question before I go back to the texts. Do I think it is wise to go through an entire pregnancy without taking prenatal vitamins? Even if they're whole food, non-GMO, are they necessary? So I have a blog post on this. If you want to search, there's a search bar at the top and also in the sidebar. I firmly believe in yes, you should take a high-quality foods-based vitamin when you're pregnant and breastfeeding, which for us moms that are not practicing birth control is really all the time. I know there are those who say that, oh, we should get all our nutrients from food and they leach nutrients from your body. I do not believe in that. I've seen women who don't take them suffer the consequences, and I've seen others who take them, like myself, have healthy pregnancies, healthy births. It's kind of more like a safeguard. I don't think that they're causing any damage, and if there are nutritional deficiencies, they're filling those gaps. So I would recommend a good prenatal, probiotic, fish oil, and a magnesium supplement just on a daily basis, and then add to that whatever, if you have a specific need, I would add that to that daily regimen. I'm going to switch to the text messages here. Any tips for how to survive being pregnant while having multiple kids already? How to deal with fatigue? Yeah, that's just survival. There was another question that I'm going to touch on later about how to deal with having all little kids in the house. So that's along the same vein as this one. you really, I think the hardest stage as far as survival is when you have 3 children that are all like 4, 2, and baby, or 3, 1, and newborn. Because they're not really an asset at all at that point. They're just all 3 a liability, and they all 3 have to be supervised nonstop. So, yeah, that really is just survival mode. I would say scale back to as simplistic of a lifestyle as you can. Cook simpler meals, simplify your home life, and I will speak more on that on the other point because she specifically touches on some points that I will address. But just simplify as much as you can and just learn to let things slide. And the other thing is, I would say, get your kids on a good sleep schedule, because even toddlers, and I would say probably children as early as 3 months, but probably by the time they're 8 or 9 months, can really be put on a really reliable schedule. And I'm not saying even so much put on a schedule as they put themselves on a schedule. And you can just enforce regular sleep times with your toddlers and your preschoolers. And that at least even when things are falling apart, you know, well, it's 11 a.m. and the kids are running amok and I'm nursing the baby, or I'm pregnant and sick, but in an hour they'll all be napping. So even though you can't take a break, then you can look forward to a break. And that'll help your mental state. And just, you know, if you're able to get help, whether that's through outside help or a mother's help, or maybe a young lady in your church who wants to get some experience, those are all really worthwhile things to explore. But yeah, mostly just survive. Any advice for a mother who's raising her first child and is a new believer? I'm in my Bible trying to find God's exception for me and also my children, but I'm scared. I will do permanent damage before it's too late. Well, that's kind of a fear that all moms have. You know, we all think that our kids are going to just grow up and be screwed up. And I think that's just kind of God intended it that way. So moms are always running scared and, you know, putting forth their best effort. I would just say relax. You're not going to screw up your child. Just the fact that you're concerned about it shows that you're a responsible mom. And if you're new in the Lord, you're just going right along with them. I was only saved for 1 year and a month before Solomon was born. So you just learn right along with them. You know, then they're still little babies, and you're not having to actively teach them by talking to them and things, you know, for another couple of years before you can have, like, you know, discourse with them. So I would say just relax and read your Bible and just do the next thing that you know to do right, and you will grow along with your child. And God is not just out to, you know, trick us and entrap us and ha ha ha, you should have known this and now you went down the wrong way. He will fill in, you know, if you seek Him with your whole heart, He will fill in the gaps that where we drop the ball, He will pick up the slack. So if you lean on God and you put forth your effort and God fills in the blanks, I really would just say relax and enjoy your baby, and just read your Bible and do the next thing that you know to do right. Can I recommend any 4th grade math curriculum for my child that is struggling in math already? A simpler math curriculum. I don't want to recommend anything specific because there's such a wide range there. It really depends on the child. We've probably had 6 or 7 different curricula for our child. Now for the younger grades, kindergarten through at least 2nd grade, I've always used the Harcourt Math, which is a public school curriculum. I buy their consumable workbook, and I've used that for all my K, 1st and 2nd. But then 3rd and on, I've used different curricula depending on the child's temperament and learning style. I noticed that this is a local area code 623, so I would say go to the homeschool convention in July, and they have a big exhibit hall, or find a local homeschool convention wherever you are. They have them in pretty much all 50 states. And you can look at different books, and you can even bring your child with you and see what appeals to them and what their learning style is, what book they can get excited about. Some people just like the black on white, you know, just black writing on white paper. Other kids like when it's colorful, or, you know, it really is just very different for each child. I would say take your child to a homeschool convention. And until then, just work on remedial math. Have them do worksheets that fill gaps that they don't know. And to find out what they should be at, you can get a good scope and sequence. A scope and sequence is something that's put out by a lot of homeschool materials publishers, where they list what they teach in each grade. So say Abeka or Bob Jones Press or Rod and Staff or any of these will have ACEs, PACEs. You can either on their website or request from the publisher a scope and sequence. And then you look it up first grade for math. They should be learning their addition facts through 20. They should learn to count up to 100. They should be able to tell time on an analog clock to the hour, things like that. So that you can go through that and you can check off, okay, he knows this, he knows this, he knows this. Oh, here's a gap. Let's fill that gap. And then we'll do that, working all the way up to his specific grade level. And then that'll, you'll have time till the summer. Most homeschool conventions are in the summer. And then in the summer, you can, at that point, take him to a convention and find a curriculum that will work for him and for you. I hope that answers that question. Will you, and if so, at what age will I let my children have cell phones and social media? Now, that's a good question. I like that one. So, social media, not until they're married and out of the home, which happens at the same time if they follow God's will, because God's will is for children to live at home until they get married. And single people that live at home don't need social media. Their interaction should really be with real people in real life, so they can learn to communicate. Social media is a tool that we as adults use because our relatives, my family, thousands of miles away, across an ocean, we want to keep in touch with friends that we had from school or from, churches that we used to go to. So it's to keep a network going even after we part ways. But a child that's living at home isn't really parting ways with anybody yet. So there's a danger that they don't use social media to keep in touch with people that they've already built relationships with. There's a danger that they're not learning to build relationships with people that they should be building relationships with in the here and now. And of course, there's inherent danger of it leading them into all sorts of wickedness on the internet. So no social media for our children until they're grown and out of the house. And as far as cell phones, Solomon has a cell phone because he takes a public bus to work every day and home. So I want to be able to get a hold of him. However, he has what's called a brick phone. It has the internet. It had some rudimentary way to get on the internet, even though it's just a brick phone that is disabled, that function. All he can do is make phone calls and receive phone calls. So I would say it depends on your child. If you have a responsible child that's responsible enough to take himself to work on a daily basis, let them have a phone that they can use as a phone. I would not give them anything where they have unfettered access to the internet. None of our children, as long as they live in our house, will have unfettered access to the internet. The temptation there is just too great. Once people are married, they're responsible to their spouse, whether that's a husband or a wife. They have children that they're responsible for. The game changes. The danger is in the transition from childhood into adulthood, and they're bridging a canyon, as it were, and that's the pitfall and that's the danger. So once they're safely on the other side, that goes back to the first question of living in an overly sexualized world and the temptations. When they're accountable to their parents or when they're accountable to their own family that they're starting, the game changes. It's that transition that's dangerous. So no cell phones with internet access for our kids. Yes, if there's a legitimate need for just a phone, and no social media. Last question from the text. Do I make my children apologize when they've done something wrong, or do you let them come to ask forgiveness on their own time? That's a good question, but yes, I do make them apologize. I think that children need to learn to apologize, and even though that's a skill that as adults they should possess of their own, or even as older children, it's still a skill that they have to learn. And by being forced to practice it, it kind of brings down their inhibition to where they're capable of saying, I am sorry, will you forgive me? Not just sorry, but actually verbalizing, I'm sorry for having done X, Y, Z. Will you forgive me? Or something along those lines. So yes, I do make them apologize because I do believe it teaches them to want to do it of their own volition, because it practices that. Just like we force them to say please and thank you, we don't just wait for when they feel like saying please and thank you, because if we don't force them to, they will never feel like it. And that will serve them well in their relationships as an adult, whether that's in a business relationship, whether that's with other people at church, whether that's with their spouses, being able to admit they are wrong. And I always tell my kids, it's not the wrongdoing that is really the most offensive. It's when you do wrong by people, and then you're adding insult to injury by refusing to acknowledge that you did wrong and by refusing to apologize. People are usually very ready to forgive as soon as somebody says, you know what I did was wrong, and I recognize that. And even if I can't promise I will never do it again, I'm aware of it and I can work on that. And that sends a strong message to the person that they wronged of, hey, I'm sorry, but I can't go back in time, but I can acknowledge it. And that really helps the person that they wronged to let it go. So it is an important skill to learn and practice. So yes, I do make them apologize. I'm going to go step away from the text for now. Let me give the number real quick one more time. 623-666-2118. I'm sorry I can't take questions on the live stream. There is some issue with YouTube. If we have the chat enabled, it crashes the live stream. So, Cindy asked, how long does it take to recover after childbirth? Now I see here it is 2:48, so we are mostly out of time for this Q&A. However, I'm only into question 12 out of 72. So I'm going to go a little over and maybe do another one with the remaining questions. How long does it take to recover after childbirth? I have a blog post on that. Fairly recent. I did it, I think, 3 or 4 months after Chloe was born, or maybe right before. So search the recent posts on the blog on that. I'm waiting for this camera to focus in so I can sit back, and it's not doing that. No autofocus here. There she is sleeping. Okay, well, I'm a little fuzzy. I'm sorry, I can't help that. I thought it would like autofocus, and it's not. I guess it's autofocusing on the baby. I would say, how long does it take to recover after childbirth? Lifetime? I don't know. I would say at least 3 months. 3 to 6 months, you can expect to be mostly back to normal. I would never expect to fully recover, because then there's breastfeeding, which takes a toll on the body. And then there's another pregnancy probably in the works. But that article has a good timeline of what to reasonably expect at what stage of postpartum. What do the older kids help the younger kids do on a daily basis? Getting dressed, getting fed, brushing their teeth, supervising them when they play, bringing them along on their chores, just little things like that. When and how do I teach the older kids to take care of the younger ones? As soon as the next baby's born. Even Boaz at 2 years old can be told, oh, hey, here's the baby in her bumbo seat on the floor. Can you just sit and play with her? And he'll chat with her and kiss her and whatnot. When do you move the baby to their own bed? Typically within a few months before the next baby comes, but that's different for everybody. What does my daily schedule look like? That's just too wide a question, but there are many schedules that I've uploaded to the blog. So there is even a tab on the side, a label called scheduling. If you click on that, it has some of my schedules on there. And a schedule has to be fluid, so whenever I add a new baby, it changes a little bit. Do you have any children that are hard to trust, and how do I deal with that? No. There are some kids that I have to check up on more to see if they did their work. But I don't have any kids where I'm thinking that they're like conniving behind my back. More just, how reliable. I wouldn't say I have any trust issues, maybe just more reliability of some kids are more reliable than others. Others I have to check up on 3 and 4 times. I don't think any of them are deceitful and going behind my back and things like that. So that would be difficult to deal with. I'm going to skip the question on the border wall because I just don't want to get into politics today. This is that other question about, I'm sorry, this is a different one. This is about trusting an older child. She's a stepmom with a stepchild and a stepchild that cannot be trusted. He's a teen, and now when he comes over to visit, he's under constant supervision and their trust is non-existent. That is a really difficult situation to be in, and I don't have any advice because I've never had to live in this situation. And I'm really sorry. I'm not trying to be insensitive, but for the sake of others who have not done this, I would very strongly discourage anyone from marrying someone who has children from a previous relationship. Now, I know that sounds horrific, and I'm sorry if I'm hurting people's feelings for whom the step situation is working out great, and I'm not trying to be down on people who've already done this, but going forward, I would very strongly discourage anybody from doing that. The Bible gives specific rules about who we can and cannot marry. As a Christian, we are not to marry an unbeliever. We are not to marry divorced people. And it does not say that we are not to marry people who have children from a previous relationship. So I'm not saying that it's wrong or sinful to do that. I'm saying it is very unwise because there's a high price that comes with fornication or adultery, which for people to have children out of wedlock, either they committed fornication or they were married to the previous parent and now are getting remarried to someone else, then it's a case of adultery. Well, God has a severe punishment on fornication and adultery, and those repercussions will continue to ripple for the rest of their life. So when you marry somebody who is bringing a child into the marriage, you are signing on to reap the repercussions of their sin, which I'm sure they feel sorry for and they've moved on from, but the consequences still keep coming. You are signing on to take those consequences, and you're signing on your future children. And I cannot tell you, as a pastor's wife, how many times we have heard of just horrible situations in these step-sibling, step-parent cases. It's very heartbreaking, and not trying to be down on anybody who is single with children out of wedlock. I think that they should remain unmarried. Now, that's just my advice. I'm not saying it's a sin. According to the Bible, they could marry another believer who has not previously been married, as long as both of them have not previously been married. But I would strongly advise against it. I know it's not popular. That used to be the general opinion. People knew if they had a child out of wedlock, they could never get married because nobody would want to marry them. That was the general idea, and that's not politically correct anymore, but I'm here to tell you the truth, not what's going to balm somebody's conscience. It's a bad situation. I would avoid getting into it, and I have no advice once you are in that situation, because there's really no good situation there as far as I know. No good solution. Here's that other question: how do I manage when all your kids are 3.5 and under and you have 3 kids? That's that hardest stage, the 3.5 and under with the 3 kids. That's the hardest stage, I would say. So just survive. Scale everything back as much as you can and just do the minimum. Hyperemesis and H. pylori, all I know about that is on the blog. So if you search my blog for that, that's all the information I have on that. I have been able to considerably reduce my morning sickness following the H. pylori protocols. I've not been able to completely eliminate it, but it has made a big difference. So everything that I know about it is on the blog. Siblings fighting constantly, always bossing the younger one around and being mean. Have I dealt with that? Yes and no. I have dealt with siblings fighting and older ones being bossy and being mean. Not constantly. I would say if it's constant, there's a problem and it should be put to stop. Goes back to the manners and the being made to apologize. kids have to be forced, if necessary, to treat their siblings with common courtesy. It's not something that comes natural. In the flesh, they just want to be the top dog and a big fish. And younger siblings are an easy target, of course. So I would not allow that. No, I would punish that. And I do punish that if I see it in our children. And as a result, no, we do not have a lot of issues. We have zero issues with siblings fighting. I can't even think of an instance where our kids just are constantly fighting with each other, or certain siblings always against certain ones. More just kind of the underhanded older ones, underhandedly, being down on the younger ones and making fun of them, all in good sport, but still, I don't allow that. So I would definitely crack down on that because it won't help them. Siblings are given to us by God so we can learn to get along with a variety of people. And it will not help them in their adult life if they can only get along with people that are just like them. Advice for after pains. They say that after pains, for each child you have, that's how many days of after pains you will experience. So 1 day after the first, maybe 2 after the second, 3 days after the third, 4 days after the fourth. And I will say that that is true. I've had that experience. However, I will also say that for the last, probably ever since Becca, I think my worst after pains were after Miriam, 4 days. And my advice for that is painkillers, ibuprofen, I believe. So I'm not a doctor. I don't know if I took Advil or Tylenol. I took one or the other. I don't know which one. So ask your midwife, but I would say over-the-counter pain medication. Beginning with Becca, I don't remember having any afterbirth pains. And I didn't do anything differently, so I don't know what that would be, but I know that my midwife gives me herbs after the birth, and that might have to do with it. So I would have to ask her, but your midwife might have a more natural route. But when it hurts that bad, and I mean hurt by the bad, like they hurt like contractions bad, yeah, I would totally just take an over-the-counter painkiller. What set me and my family on the more holistic route? Having a baby. I started on this route when Solomon was born, is when I started reading about this, and I've just continued down that road. When do I start brushing my child's teeth? When they have teeth, not when they just have gums. Typically when they have... Our kids go from no teeth to 4 teeth in like a week, so that's when I start brushing. The child hates it and screams because should they do it, or does that give them a bad association? Some of my kids have also screamed. I'm just like, that makes it easier because your mouth is wide open, so I just go in there and just scrub real quick. It only takes a few seconds, really. You don't have to brush for 2 minutes when they have 4 teeth that are like the size of one adult tooth altogether. So if you just brush for 10 seconds, that's fine. They won't get a bad association. The nice thing is the more kids you have, brushing their teeth becomes a cool thing. Like Boaz and Stephen just love brushing their teeth because it's something that I've seen the big kids do. And they will cry if I try to send them to bed and they haven't brushed their teeth. Like, oh, I haven't brushed my teeth yet. So it does get easier when you have older kids that they can follow along. Until then, just brush while they scream. And I promise they will still brush their teeth when they're older. How do you train a child not to whine as young toddlers when it seems to be an innate part of their communication? Somebody woke up. Say hi. Did you have a good nappy? Never give them what they whine for is my motto. So they have to ask nicely. If they whine, they can't have it. And then they learn not to whine. I don't think it's an innate part of their communication. I think it's an innate part of their nature, of their sinful nature. So you don't want to feed into that. But no, they don't have to whine to communicate. All right, is she interfering here? If somebody can text me, if you can no longer hear me, I know. Next question, and this is before I go back to the other one. And I believe that this was left by the same lady who was asking about the 20-month-old that was too clingy. And the reason why I think that is because the comment was repeated, And then immediately afterward, also by an anonymous commenter, I had this question, and in my mind, I'm going to connect the two, and if they're not from the same person, I apologize. The reason why I want to connect them, because I think it is an important thing to take note of. Her other question is, how do you handle older siblings changing the opposite gender's nappy? Do I have a strict no boys allowed to change a girl and vice versa? And the reason why I'm connecting this with the other question is because, well, let me answer the question first. I'm going to go back to the first. Thank you. Somebody said you can hear me just fine. Thanks. I don't have a strict no boys allowed to change a girl and vice versa. No. Our boys can change baby girls and our daughters can change baby boys. I don't have a baby boy right now, but when when Boaz and Stephen were babies. As parents, to take that to its logical conclusion, we would have to say that a father could only change a son's diaper and a mother could only change a daughter's diaper, which is simply not even possible from a practical standpoint, because the mother is the one staying home and changing the diapers of both genders. Now, I know that there's a concern here, and I know that this ties in with the Duggar family and that whole thing, where they said, well, young boys are tempted and they're exposed to temptations, and if they see that, so, have your daughters in bloomers and never let them get changed in front of their brother, or never let them even see the baby naked. And of course, I agree that siblings should keep their nakedness to themselves when they're out of the baby and toddler stage. But of course, when they're just a baby and a toddler and they're dependent on somebody to change their diaper, just as much as I wouldn't see my teen naked, but when he was a toddler and he needed a diaper change, of course, that was perfectly appropriate. The same applies. Only somebody who is a perverted reprobate would be sexually stimulated by looking at an infant or a baby or a toddler. So it's not like, oh, he changed too many diapers and he became a child molester. That is not a natural desire. Somebody would already have to be a pervert and a reprobate. So therefore, we do not forbid it, because our children are not pervert reprobates and they don't find an infant stimulating in that way. It's just a dirty diaper and you change it. Now, I'm tying this in with the previous question because I think that somebody who has this doubt and this fear in their mind, they're not a pervert. But there's a chance that maybe this person was violated themselves as a child or a teen or at some stage in their life. And that's why they're overly vigilant in this area. And connected with the fact that I think that this is talking about the same 20-month-old, maybe you're 20-month-old, maybe there's somebody in your family who is like this, who did this to you, or you're aware of them doing that to somebody. Or maybe this is on a subconscious level and your child is picking up on it and you are picking up on it. So with those two comments connected, I would definitely encourage you not to force your child, your baby, to spend time with any relative that they are not comfortable with, and force them to be held by them or cuddled by them or whatever, especially in light of these concerns that you have, because I think there's an issue that runs deeper there. At this point, I'm going to switch back to a couple of texts, and I apologize that I'm going over. Feel free to check out of this live stream. I'm just going to keep going until my husband texts me that I need to cut it short if necessary, or I get through it. I'm about halfway through right now. How do I deal with other ladies around me that think it's okay to wear pants, tight clothing, and half-thigh dresses? I don't care in the slightest. That's between them and the Lord, and I do not care. This again goes back to security issues. I have really noticed in the last 6 months, just maybe a year, just ladies really, really struggling with insecurity and projecting that insecurity onto others, whether that's in the area of breastfeeding, where it's like, well, you're just whipping out your breasts because you're just looking for my husband to commit adultery with you. Or, women demanding that their husband just stay home and babysit them, lest he, go out and just commit adultery with the first pretty girl that crosses his path. I'm not bothered by it. I don't care about it. Men will always find women attractive. That's just perfectly normal. And there's other things that women find attractive in a man. see, men are more attracted by the eye. So when they see somebody who's scantily dressed, or even just a pretty girl, I mean, if we wanted to, I mean, her hair could be pretty, her outfit could be pretty, a very modestly dressed girl could be very pretty. And to a godly man, a modestly dressed girl is probably far more attractive than somebody who's dressed like a hooker. Did you drop your toy? So the real issue is insecurity. Because you can't just put your husband in a white padded room, and you can't just demand that every woman wear a burqa. The problem is in the heart of man. And, you know, us as ladies, we don't find men's looks the primary factor of how we're attracted to them. Women are attracted to power, authority, influence, and that often translates into somebody who is successful, somebody who has a position like a pastorate or the owner of a business, somebody who is successful, maybe has money, things like that. That's what a woman finds attractive. So just like a man might feel insecure, like, oh wow, you know, this guy, you know, as ladies we should be careful not to praise other men, because even though we're not praising their looks, if we're like, wow, this guy is just really awesome at XYZ, that kind of sends a message to a husband, like as if he said to you, whoa, that lady has really pretty clothes on. So the insecurities are there on both ends, and I think it's important to, there's a fine line between having a righteous jealousy and being insecure, and realizing that what other people do is not my business. If other people wear pants or mid-thigh dresses, that's between them and the Lord. And if my husband commits adultery, which he would never do, I'm saying if a husband were to commit adultery, it's not because he had all the right intentions and then this woman came along scantily dressed. So to answer that question in a really long, lengthy way, I'm sorry. I think it's important to home in on that. It's just really been striking a chord with me. Because I think especially as many ladies desire their husbands maybe to go into the ministry or to succeed in a business that he starts, there has to be a level of sharing there that you are willing to share your husband. The level to which you are willing to share your husband is the level to which he can expand his circle of influence. So if you're like putting the shackles of him on him, like, well, this makes me uncomfortable and I'm insecure about this other thing, that will really just limit the sphere of influence your husband can have. And that's why this over-attached jealousy is just really misplaced and detrimental. One moment real quick. Hey, John, do you want to come take Chloe for me? I brought John along as a helper. All right, everybody, there's John. Can you leave my door shut again the way it was, honey? And then you can just be in the mother-baby room with her. All right, that was John. They were all vetting for who would get to go and help today, and he got all his schoolwork done at 7 a.m. and was up and ready, and he's like, Mom, I want to go and help. So I'm going to go back to a few more other texts here. What do you think about women/girls wearing leggings? Do you or your girls wear them? What about pajama pants? Yes, our girls wear leggings. Yes, our girls wear pajama pants. No, I don't think they're wrong. I believe they're part of undergarments, attire that you wear in the privacy of your home. I think it's the outer garment that matters, that distinguishes you from a man to a woman. I'm not saying that men can wear women's underwear. Somebody's going to say that. I think that the leggings are as part of an undergarment. It's to keep us warm. I mean, tights are just leggings. You know, it's all the same thing. If somebody wanted to make the argument that we cannot cover our legs one at a time, then you can also not wear tights or socks or anything like that. So I'm fine with the kids wearing the girls wearing leggings and tights and pajama pants. Personally, I always wear nightgowns. If it gets cold in the winter, then I wear leggings under my nightgown. So that's what the girls do. I don't do pajama pants. I just do the leggings under a nightgown. If it gets cold, like 40 degrees outside at night, that's cold for us. My husband and I want to attend Faithful Baptist Church. Any tips for moving to Arizona? That same question comes up in here too, so I'm going to answer it now. First of all, I would not do it in the summer. If I were to move to Arizona, I would move here probably in like October is a good time to move, if you can move anytime. I would not move here at the beginning of summer. Also, if you have children, realize that moving them across the country or even just uprooting them from wherever they are is a major shock to the system. There is a culture shock. Expect them to take at least a year to recover from it, the younger ones. The 4 years and younger, I would say, takes a year for them to recover from that. The other thing is that you can expect to become ill whenever you move far across the country, from one state to another, from one climate to another. So be prepared for that. Be prepared for when you get here, your body is going to take about 3 months to adjust. That's why I said you don't want to come in the summer. You don't want to move here in May and have your kids uprooted, locked indoors because of the extreme heat, and sick from changing environments all in the height of summer. That's just miserable. The other thing I would say, if you're moving to Arizona, rent first so that you know what area of town you want to go into. There's lots of opinions on it. I have my own opinions on it. So you want to come here and find out for yourself, really. And the other thing I would say, that get a house with a pool that's gated. So you definitely want to have a pool, but you want it gated because of the children. It's just the only way to stay sane in the summer, because otherwise you're cooped in the house. That's just a wonderful way to have the kids get outside activity every day, blow off energy. In Arizona in the summer, it gets light at like 4:30 a.m. and it doesn't get dark until about 9 p.m. If you don't have a pool, that makes for a really, really, really long day indoors. So I would say that's my advice for moving to Arizona. I know your church is geared toward young families, but do you have any older single ladies who are members also? Yes, we definitely do. I don't want to name any names because then people get mad at me like we have older ladies, but we do have older single ladies. It is predominantly younger families, but we have older single ladies. We also have older married ladies whose children do not live at home anymore. So they're not single, but they're not young moms with children. Would I consider a 12-year-old boy who did vile things to a 4-year-old girl who is a step-sibling a reprobate, especially if they don't have any remorse? Yes. Unequivocally, yes. And do not allow them to have any more access to the 4-year-old, because they cannot be fixed. It is, that ship has sailed. That child is a reprobate. The Bible has instances of cursed children, is what it says. And it's heartbreaking, and I'm very, very sorry. Be very careful who you let your kids around. If you're hearing this, don't allow your children, just because somebody's a child. There are instances of molesters as young as 7 and 8 years old. Many times they were evicting themselves, and then they repeat what they've seen. Other times they have gotten into things on the internet that got them down the wrong path, and it just has escalated and become more extreme. A 12-year-old that did that and shows no remorse, yes, unequivocally, that's a reprobate. What types and sizes of pots and pans and other cookware do I use to be able to not only prepare a meal for 11 people, but also have leftovers for the next day? I like that. That's a good question. I remember when we got married, I bought a pots and pans set, stainless steel, at Walmart, and the big pot was like this wide around and about this deep. That was like my stock pot. And I was like, wow, this makes so much food. This is insane. What am I going to do with all this food? Well, that's like my smallest pot now. The pots and pan sets that I use all stainless steel or cast iron. That's the only things I use. You can always find a good deal on them at Costco or Sam's Club. I've bought my last pot set at Sam's Club, and that has lasted me probably for the last 10 years. It's Wolfgang Puck brand. So the stock pot is like this tall, and I want to say 12 inches around. And all the pots in the set are that big, the skillet, everything. I really like that one. That works if I make the pasta in one of the big stock pots and I make the sauce in the other. And that's how I have enough leftovers. That's what I use 9 times out of 10. I do also have a really large stock pot that's like a a 20-quart stainless steel stock pot that I bought on Amazon. If I'm making a large batch of soup or something like that, I use that. And then I also have a massive cast iron skillet that's probably this wide around. It's like, it's a foot and a half, I want to say, diameter. And it's really deep. I got it on Free Cycle several years ago on my birthday. So it's my birthday gift from God, and I'm always thankful for it when I use it. That'll work if I'm making a skillet meal. That's big enough for all of us. It's almost as wide as my oven, so it fits in my oven if I slide it diagonally. It's that big. But I try to just have a few pots that I use a lot because space is limited in my kitchen. So those are the ones I use. I'm going to go back to the questions on that were submitted on the blog. Before I do, I'm going to show this number again. If you want to text, it's 623-666-2118. What have I learned since my last show in the last couple of years? I can't believe it's been 2 years since I last did this. That went really fast. She was specifically asking about parenting teens. Oh my goodness, let me tell you, parenting teens. I mean, I knew teens are awkward, but I thought that was other people's teens. Turns out my teens are too. They are very precious. It's definitely a different ballgame. So teens is like toddler brain with man brawn. That about sums it up if I had to write a dictionary definition. I've learned that they don't really get easier. It just changes, and they, I mean, not in a vicious way. Like one time they tried to, I'm not even going to give specifics. One of my older children tried to fix an expensive piece of equipment. And he was like, oh, I'm going to service this. And it ended up broken and costing us $1,000 to replace. And he was doing this out of the goodness of his heart to help me. And I was just like, oh, please. So, yeah, toddler brain and man brawn. That's what I've learned. But they're precious. They're sweet. It's just like little kids, you know, just more damaging. Other things I've learned. One thing I really want to talk about and blog about, I'm just going to throw it out here and not elaborate so people can start looking at this. And it's at the forefront of my mind because it's allergy season. And I don't know, some of you might know that Isaac and also now Rebecca and myself suffer from seasonal allergies. A lot of people's allergies get worse if they move to Arizona. There's a misconception that our climate is better for allergies, but that's not true. I think technically that could be true when we're talking about indigenous plant life in the indigenous climate. The thing that makes the allergies so bad is that we live in a big city with smog, and you know it's down in a valley, so it all hangs over us. And a lot of the plant life is plant life that has been transplanted here from the East Coast. So we've got these high pollen producing trees in our climate, which is very arid, very little rain this time of year. So we've got all this pollen in the air and nothing to bring it down. So many people like myself, I never had seasonal allergies until we moved here. Isaac and Becca the same. Well, this time of year, January through March, Isaac is typically affected by seasonal asthma brought on by the seasonal allergies for the last 5 years, I would say. He has been down with asthma for those 3 months, meaning he can't go play outside. He typically ends up on at least one course of steroids. He has to do the nebulizer treatment every night, at a minimum, if not every 4 hours, to keep it from escalating. I have to keep an eye on his oxygen levels, his pulse oxygen levels. So just things like that, all due to asthma, and the asthma being triggered by the allergies. Well, last year, right near the end of that asthma season, I made the connection between asthma and wheat, the grain wheat. I was pregnant at the time with Chloe, and I suffer from asthma only when I'm pregnant for my last 2 pregnancies, and only when it's that 6th season. So I have that allergy, but it only turns into asthma when I am pregnant, which has to do with hormones, can trigger asthma. And so I experimented, as it were, on him and me by cutting out wheat, and that has eliminated the asthma. And I didn't want to talk about it until this next season is over because we're right smack dab in the middle of it. But Isaac is always very, very sick right around his birthday. His birthday is next week. And the 2 weeks in February leading up to his birthday, he's always just in bed sick, has even had to go to the hospital with asthma. And none of it this year. I've cut out all wheat in our family. I have replaced it with a different grain that is an ancient form of wheat called einkorn. And even though it is wheat, and I don't want to say it's gluten because einkorn has gluten in it. It has more gluten than modern wheat, in fact, but it's a different kind of gluten. And there's a really good book on the market, and I'm not just wholesale recommending it, like, I don't know, it probably makes references to evolution in there that you can just skip over. It's called Wheat Belly. And Wheat Belly is great for explaining the genetic underpinnings of why modern wheat and modern gluten is so destructive. But it triggers asthma and it triggers allergies. So at home, I've replaced 100% all the wheat with einkorn. That's all I use anymore for pasta, for crackers. I make all my own bread, sourdough. When we're out and about, I let Isaac eat wheat. Like if we go to pizza, he doesn't have to get a special crust most of the time, but January, February, March, no wheat for him at all outside the home, and at home it's only the einkorn. And I can say with that, he has had no asthma at all. I keep checking his oxygen levels and they're perfectly fine. He had a cold, an upper respiratory thing that would normally push him over the edge and land him at the doctor, nothing like that this year. So I'm very optimistic that that was the missing piece of the puzzle as far as triggering his asthma. So that's a big thing that I've recently learned. Tips for a first-time mother regarding home birth. Have a midwife or skilled physician. I guess it's home birth, so it would be a midwife. Definitely have a skilled midwife. And don't allow guests. And that sounds weird, but I think first-time moms are sometimes especially antsy and they want to bring in their support team. Every additional person that you bring in will add an hour or more to your labor. So if you have 4 people, just add 4 hours to your labor. If that was going to be a 12-hour birth, you're now looking at a 16-hour birth. That's just a rough rule of thumb. And then the worst people to have at any birth, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, are the grandparents. That's the girl's parents or the dad's parents. Grandparents are just the worst people to have at the birth. Any midwife will tell you that because, you know, it's their baby giving birth. It's their baby having a baby. So they kind of tend to be underfoot and just make everybody antsy and stressful. It's a rite of passage that you have to go through. You have to give birth. Have mom on speed dial. As soon as that baby pops out, she can come over and hold the baby and tuck you in and cook your meal. I would say no grandparents or other guests and a good midwife and just very few people there. And you can do it. That's the other thing. Do I allow my children to go beyond their grade level in homeschooling? Instance, if they, based on their age, would be in 2nd grade, can they go on to 3rd? Yes, absolutely. All our children are ahead of their grade. And I would strongly encourage that, even if it's just in one subject. Like, for instance, Rebecca is 8 years old and she is in a 4th grade math curriculum. But in all other subjects, she's in 3rd grade curriculum. So what kind of decorations besides pictures? Nothing really. I guess curtains, valances, throw pillows, things like that. I'm going to go back to the text here for a minute. My pastor changed from salvation by belief into repent from sins to be saved. Is it okay if I discuss the Bible with the pastor's wife to show the error? I would not think that is wise, because if you talk to the pastor's wife, you're basically putting her in a position where she has to either agree with you against her husband or else, you know, disagree with you, which would cause tension. I'm sure they're well aware of the issue. I would not think that is prudent. I would think you're just wasting your time and making enemies. If they're aware of the issue, then they didn't just accidentally change what they believed, and they probably won't be persuaded otherwise by you. Can I give some tips on training your children to sit still and behave in church, especially a terrible Tuesday? I know that's the typical term, terrible twos. I like to call it the terrific twos. I think 2-year-olds are great. The kids only get to be terrible twos if you kind of were too late to start implementing discipline. If you start when they're younger, by the time they get into their 2, 3, 4s, which is typically the terrible twos, there will be fewer issues. I think just practicing at home is the best way. Same as for like how do you get your kids to behave at the store. At church is probably not the best training ground. Do a Bible time at home with them. Read the Bible, memorize verses with them, and have them sit still. Even just if you do story time, and you can't just read the Bible for an hour, but you could read the Bible for 15 minutes and then do story time for half an hour and expect your kids to sit still and not get up and then punish them if they do. So at-home training is what I would recommend for them. Can I recommend any books to learn about vaccines? Not any specific ones. There are a ton of them online and at the library. And between the library systems, like the Phoenix Public Library has like 20 libraries in their system, they have like every book on the subject if you want to get it, on loan from one of the other branches. I remember I went through this when Solomon was a baby. I started questioning vaccines when he was 12 months old. And all the information I got was from, this is back before the internet was what it is today. This is back before Google had been invented. There was such a time. I got all the books through the Sacramento Public Library system, and I had to get them brought to my branch from other branches, but it worked very well. So really just read books from all sides of the spectrum and check up on their thing in the back where they list all their sources and make sure that it's all legit. What age do I teach my children to cook and how? Some of my kids have shown more interest than others. So just when they show an interest, I just age appropriately, I mean, even Stephen could be given a plastic knife to chop up herbs or something. So you just do what's age appropriate for them at that. It's really different for every family and every child. And I have them at the kitchen counter with me and work at the kitchen counter with them. Do I use a homeschool curriculum for my younger children? If so, what is it? Yes, I'd use structured curriculum. Again, what I use for my family right now is not what I used for my family 10 years ago, is not what somebody else would use with their family. So I would say find local resources in your state and ask around and go to events that they have where you can look at it physically yourself. It's saying my connection is lost. I don't know if anybody can hear me. The internet keeps going out. Okay, I'm just going to go on. I don't know if the internet is on. I don't think it is on right now, but I'm just going to keep going because it's recording it. My Bible study teacher got a vasectomy in his 30s, and when my husband and I were newlyweds, he told my husband not to have children with me because he feels we will be going through end times in less than 8 years from now. My husband looks up to him and listens to him. That being said, this almost destroyed our marriage. I prayed and prayed, and God gave us a baby, and now my husband wants more kids. Our marriage is great, but this has always bothered me. He still teaches our Bible study. That would bother me too. That is not a good situation. Let me see here if I am still online. It's telling me that my internet is out. So if you can hear me, can somebody text me that you can still hear me? Because it's showing me that the connection is cut. If you can text me at this number. I'm going to text my husband real quick and see if I'm still streaming. Okay, it says it can hear me. All right, so I guess I am on. It shows me that my connection is lost, but okay, thank you. I am online. Now I lost my spot. I think we were talking curriculum. Thank you, everybody. So no specific homeschool curriculum for children. Here's another question. How do you prepare your daughters for marriage and motherhood? Just the same. Just live your life. They'll learn from you how to be a wife and mother just by doing what you do. What pets do we have currently? A dog, a cat, a hamster, and 2 zebra finches. Arizona heat, sunblock. We use a natural one that's like, actually we don't use sunblock, but maybe 2 days out of the year. We typically put a sun hat on and stay indoors from like 10 a.m. to about 4 p.m. And most sunblock is chemical sunblock and is unhealthy. And then there's physical sunblock that's just zinc oxide. So that's what we use if we have to be out during the day, like if we go to a theme park or something. I use the Badger brand for that. There's a lot of other small questions. I don't want to go into all of them right now because I'm simply out of time. So I'm going to have to skip over some of these. Good resources for breastfeeding information. Kelly Mom and La Leche League is the best way there. When is a good time to start homeschooling a child? What age? Again, based on the child, you homeschool them from birth, really. You just teach them the next thing. First, you teach them to sit up, and then you teach them to say mama and daddy and how to feed themselves, and you just do the next thing. So it depends on every child. If you have a child with a learning disability, that will look different from a child that's very advanced. What did you do with high energy children? This child is 4 years old. She usually gets up around 7 a.m., does not nap, and is still not tired for her 8 p.m. bedtime. So sleep begets sleep. And this is a big help to moms. And I already touched on this earlier. Make your kids take naps. That's really just the key to staying sane as a mom with all little children. If she gets up at 7 a.m. and doesn't nap, I'm not surprised that she's not tired at 8 p.m. I would be surprised if she were, because this child is wired. This child has had no downtime. This child's system is pumped full of adrenaline. So enforce naps. Sleep begets sleep. The earlier your kids go to bed at night, the later they will sleep in the morning. The later they go to sleep at night, the earlier they get up the next morning. So I would say a child at 4 years old, 8 p.m. is probably the latest I would put them to bed. More like 7:30 would be my bedtime. And then they'll sleep in until 7 or 8 in the morning. And definitely there should be a nap happening in the afternoon of about an hour and a half to 3 hours. Now, whenever I say this, moms will say, but my child won't nap. You can't force someone to sleep. It's just not possible. You can't force them to fall asleep. However, you can force them to lie still and silent with their eyes closed and not get up. So that's just as good as if they were asleep, because they're in bed and they're not getting up and they're not playing and they're silent and they have the eyes closed. Number one, chances are they will fall asleep anyway. And number two, even if they don't, it's as good as if they were asleep, and they will still, their body will still slow down and relax. And even if they're just daydreaming, they will zone out and have that. So definitely make them lie down and take a rest. Is dancing to hymns at home something you would discourage, encourage, or just let it be? And this is talking about children. First off, I don't think dancing with your spouse is wrong, unless you're just like doing some really provocative tango, I guess that's just suggestive to the crowd. I don't think there's anything wrong with ballroom dancing with your own spouse. I know that there are Christians who take that stance, and it's just simply not in the Bible. That being said, I would not encourage or discourage dancing at home. It's just what little kids do. They just move their bodies in tune to the music, and I think that's perfectly fine. I cannot afford medical intervention or have a midwife at the birth of my second child. I was blessed to have an uncomplicated hospital delivery of my first child. However, I did have a second-degree peritoneal tear that required stitches. Do you have any tips on preventing severe tearing during delivery? So I'm not sure how to take the I cannot afford medical intervention or have a midwife. I don't understand if this lady is saying that she will attempt an unassisted home birth or if she's going back to the hospital but doesn't have a midwife. I think if I had to guess that she's going to the hospital because she wasn't able to retain a midwife for home birth. If the question is about an unassisted home birth, I would say don't do it. If you cannot afford a midwife, go to the hospital. Even if you can't afford a midwife, you might be able to afford a doula at the hospital. And some doulas even provide services for free because they have to get so many births for their requirements or certification. So I would definitely encourage the use of a doula. Going to the hospital without a doula is like going to court without an attorney. It's possible to come out of there by yourself and well, but you're better off having an advocate there, which that's the doula. Some other options are some midwives accept barter, like if your husband is a painter, they might want you to paint their house for doing the prenatal package. So that's something that you might look into. Some states allow Medicare to cover a midwife. Now, I don't know what the requirements are in Arizona, and I don't even know what they're in any state. So you would have to look into that. But I do know that people have told me, I know actually in California, I do know that midwifery, home birth midwives, some of them are covered by Medicare. So that's an option to look into. I do not think it is wrong to use Medicare because we've all paid into it. It's kind of like a forced insurance that's forced upon all of us. I will say we have never used Medicare. We have never used any government assistance for that matter. But I do get asked, do I think it's wrong? I don't think it's wrong because it's, like I said, it's an insurance that we all have to purchase, so I don't think it's wrong to cash out on that. But that being said, that might be something you want to look into. And I'm not saying that I do that because we have not done that. I'm going to the text here just for a minute to see. Okay, they're all saying that they can hear me. All right, so some are still listening, I see. The tongue-tie question, yes, I will get to that right now. Let me see how far in advance it is. Okay, I'm going to bring up the tongue-tie question right now. It's on the next page. Tongue ties, that's another big thing I've recently learned, to go back to that other question. It's a genetic thing, and it's increasing. Tongue ties are. Now, most people, when they think of tongue tie, think of what would be considered an anterior tongue tie. And I don't want to stick my tongue out and demonstrate it, especially because I am not tongue-tied. But if you want to just go to Google Images, just type in anterior tongue tie. That's what we typically think of. It's the flap of skin, the frenulum under the tongue, that connects the tongue to the bottom of the mouth. And that's what most people think when they hear tongue-tied. So when they don't see that tight frenulum, that little thing there, they're like, oh, my child is not tongue-tied. Well, that's an anterior tie. There's also a posterior tie, and the posterior tie is the fleshy part at the back of the tongue. And that can be tied, where it's just all across, not just that one flap of skin, but where the flesh, where the tongue is actually on the roof of the mouth. That might be too far attached to the front. That is what's becoming more common, but is often undiagnosed because it's not something that's been an issue much. With breastfeeding having gone almost completely by the wayside, a lot of this knowledge has been lost and is just now making a renaissance. So the posterior tongue ties, that is not something that can be snipped by an ENT. The question that was given here is an ENT snipped it with scissors. A posterior tie cannot, it can be snipped with scissors, but it would have to be done repeatedly, and there would be a lot of bleeding, and there would be stitches involved if the child is an older child. So a posterior tie is really what's interfering with the breastfeeding, even if it's not visible. Now, everybody with an anterior tie also has a posterior tie. Think of an anterior tie like as being an extreme form of tongue tie, whereas a posterior tie does not mean that they necessarily also have an anterior tie. I would definitely recommend having it checked by a specialist. And there's a website online, and I don't know what it is, but if you just start researching tongue ties, that will list experts in each state and in major cities of where to go, and just research posterior tongue ties. So with all that being said, my husband is severely tongue-tied. He has anterior and posterior tongue tie, and most of our children have inherited that tie. Now, there are things that can be done. It's a genetic defect, like I said, but genetic defects don't have to be activated. There are nutritional things, and specifically B vitamins, that can prevent tongue ties, that defect from becoming triggered. So I have not looked into that extensively. I'm just throwing that out there if you want to research that. There are things that can be done nutritionally, even though it is a genetic component, to prevent them from occurring. Most of our children have had tongue ties. And we got it corrected in Boaz, and we got it corrected in Chloe. And most recently, Solomon, at age 15, he had an anterior and posterior tie, which did not interfere with his breastfeeding. He was a chubby baby. He breastfed well. But as he has recently, in the last year, just shot up and grown like insane. On his 14th birthday, he was still shorter than me. And now by his 15th birthday, he was taller than me or my husband. So he just shot up. Well, as he grew so fast, there was an issue with the tongue tearing. When he spoke, he would tear the tip of his tongue because the frenulum was so tight. It didn't grow as fast as the rest of him grew, I guess. So having read about the effects of posterior tongue ties, it's not just breastfeeding that's affected. When somebody has a tongue tie, it affects their entire palate and the alignment of their teeth and all their craniofacial muscles and everything. So one easy way to check is if you're tongue-tied, when you are not talking and your mouth is closed, is your tongue resting against the roof of your palate? The entire tongue should be resting against the roof of your palate. People who are tongue-tied, their tongue is not touching the roof of their mouth. And if they're somewhat tongue-tied, just the tip of their tongue is touching in the very front. But ideally, your entire tongue should be pressed against the roof of your mouth when you're not talking. And your tongue being there is what spaces the palate correctly, brings in the teeth nicely, and then, that's where children need braces, because instead of having a wide, flat palate, they have a high, narrow palate. And then there's crowding of the teeth and palate spaces and all that stuff. And it can be traced back to the tongue tie. So going forward, I definitely think, the breastfeeding aside, it didn't make a difference for breastfeeding with Chloe. But we still went ahead and did the revision just to prevent future issues with a high, narrow palate. Her tongue being loosed helps prevent other problems with the teeth, the saliva flow, increased cavities because the saliva flow is not what it should be. The craniofacial muscles being tight leads to the airway being restricted, and that gets worse and worse as you get older in life. That can cause like choking and things like that. The digestion is different. So there's a lot of trickle-down effects that get worse and worse. That's why Solomon wanted to get his tongue tie taken care of, and that's why we did Chloe. And going forward, if the baby is tongue-tied, we will have them revised on that immediately. There is still a lot being learned about this, so I've just now scratched the surface of that, and there's a lot of information you can find online, and probably more will come out. Am I against going to Disney? What theme parks do I go to? I would not go to Disneyland even if it weren't questionable, because it seems like a complete nut house zoo. I know that they're really big on having homo days, like once a month, I think. We really like Legoland in California. If somebody could tell them to reinstate the homeschool days for out-of-state children, that would be great, because they used to do homeschool days, not just for California children, but for children everywhere. They haven't done that in a few years. So if you're listening, Legoland, bring that back, please. We like Legoland. We've gone to Magic Mountain. There are no theme parks in Arizona, so we always have to go to SoCal for that. There's Knott's Berry Farm we've not been to, but that would be a fun one. So yeah, I do believe in going to theme parks, but I have no plans of ever going to Disney, no. Do you have any advice on being comfortable in skirts and dresses? I love my skirts, but sometimes it is just uncomfortable, like when I'm playing with my little cousin. Shorter skirts, maybe, knee length with leggings underneath it. Or if you don't want the leggings showing, you could just have like bike shorts and just go below the knee, would be my recommendation. It's usually the long skirts, the maxi skirts, where you get tangled in. I'm going to go back to the questions that were sent in. Are Becca homeschool books using the King James Bible? Yes, exclusively. Do I think a Christian should do hypnobabies? This question has come up in a previous Q&A, so for a longer answer, you want to look into that. I have mixed feelings on hypnobabies. The name, I'm against hypnosis. I think hypnosis is demonic. Hypnobabies is not really hypnosis. It's a misnomer. So it has the appearance of evil. The techniques that are taught are just simple coping techniques that we all employ in daily life. It just kind of helps you to refocus and kind of, focus out the pain and, focus on controlling your thinking. It's not hypnosis like what we think of as hypnosis. So I'm not against it, but I can see why some people have misgivings about it. They do have good coping techniques. I've listened to the whole thing. I think it's 6 or 7 CDs. I've listened to them all once through. I didn't find anything objectionable about it, but I don't personally use it just because by the time I listened to it, I think I was pregnant with my 8th or 9th baby. 8th. It was with Boaz that I listened to it. And it was just already stuff that I had already learned to practice, but maybe for a first-time mom, that would be more beneficial. Another question, do I ever struggle with resentment when my husband goes out of country for days? Do you have any words of encouragement? No, not resentment. I think sometimes maybe a feeling of, wow, must be nice, just for a second in the flesh, But there's a saying, if all our problems were hung on the line, you take yours and I take mine. So, no, not resentment. His life might seem more glamorous in some aspects, and my life is more glamorous at other times. So I think it's really important not to let a root of bitterness take hold and grow resentful. God has us in our places because that's what will make us the happiest. Okay, here's a question that I wanted to mention. How do you prevent mastitis? And somebody has already recommended soy lecithin for this. And I want to second that. I have never struggled with mastitis. But I have heard of multiple ladies who take lecithin. Lecithin is an emulsifier. An emulsifier helps fats dissolve in liquids. And it makes the fats less sticky, as it were. In the case of breastfeeding, it helps the milk flow. So moms who struggle with mastitis, if they take lecithin on a regular basis, it helps keep the milk flowing and it can resolve mastitis. I read about this because I am taking, well, not right now, but I was taking lecithin for milk letdown. If you struggle with hind milk letdown and you produce mostly foremilk and not the higher fat hind milk, the lecithin helps bring down the higher fat content from the hind milk. So you can get it from here, up into here, and then into the baby, so it doesn't get stuck on your hips. However, I would not recommend soy lecithin. That's I use sunflower lecithin. I buy my sunflower lecithin online from Azure Standard, but I imagine you can get it from Amazon or anywhere. It doesn't taste weird. It looks gross. I just take a jar of water, I put a blob of it in, and then I just knock it back without looking at it because it looks like something that somebody hacked up. So I covered the tongue tie thing. I just wanted to say don't feel guilty about it for not trying harder. Just When it comes to babies and children, just ditch the guilt, because that's going to drive you insane. And I think any mom who's concerned, the fact that you're concerned means you should not feel guilty, because you are doing what you can. Another question: how do I deal with or feel comfortable with my husband going into the world and seeing so many women dressed and modest? What about my sons? Are you noticing that this is a recurrent theme? I think that women are really struggling with insecurity. And that's really the underlying issue. You cannot take them out of the world. You can only keep them from the evil. And I think if you are feeling secure in who you are, I mean, if my husband hadn't eaten in days and then he drives by McDonald's, he might be tempted to eat there. But if he has a happy marriage at home and you're serving filet mignon, as it were, and I'm not trying to say I'm filet mignon, I'm not trying to say I'm conceited. I'm just saying if you have a certain, if you value yourself and you know that your husband loves you, you would not be struggling with such insecurity, and you would not be tormented by this thought. And like I said, you will have to share your husband, and to the extent to which you're willing to share him is the extent to which he can have an influence. It would be very easy for a wife to say, well, I don't want my husband being a pastor, because when he's a pastor, there will be other women who want to talk to him, and who, like if he travels, like to do soul winning marathons or whatever, then I'm not there to babysit him. So I'm going to come tag along and bring all the kids, and that way he can just take care of me and can't go out soul winning. That really is detrimental. And even if the husband goes along with it, he's not going to like you anymore for being, you know, the proverbial ball and chain. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. He might grow resentful. He might start acting that way. And then it's like, it will only feed your insecurity. So the insecurity will only beget more insecurity. And I'm all about, you know, husband and wife, one flesh, keeping themselves pure in their actions and in their thoughts. But this over insecure thing is very detrimental. So I would say work on your insecurity. A long list of questions here that are all just, I can't address them all individually. One I want to point out: a married couple sleeping in different rooms. What do I think about that? For the sleeping arrangement in your family, do whatever works best. Because when you have children, sleep is a premium. So if for you that means I'm going to let my babies cry it out for 3 nights and then they sleep and everybody's sanity is preserved, do that. If it's like, well, I can't listen to my baby cry, I want to have her with me, then do that. Whatever you find the easiest to deal with. If your husband's a light sleeper, or if he snores and keeps you up and it's like, well, he needs to sleep in a different room, he prefers to sleep in a different room, do whatever works for you, do whatever preserves your sanity. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. People used to do that throughout history. For soul winning, what do I recommend for personal protection from loose dogs or criminals? That depends on where you live. We live in Arizona, where concealed carry is permitted. Personally, I carry a handgun with me everywhere except where it's not legal, so libraries and post offices and schools and such, but pretty much any place where I go, I am bringing my handgun. So that would be for criminals. For loose dogs, that might not be my first thought. So a can of mace. But you want to get mace that's for dogs, because not all mace will stop dogs. Even with that, I will add here that depending on the breed of dog, and I know animal lovers are going to want to crucify me over this, go to dogsbite.org. Our website is www.dogsbite.org, and look at the statistics. And what I took away from that is that, you know, pit bulls are a very dangerous breed. They are responsible, even though they only make up a small percentage of the dog population, they are responsible for the vast majority of attacks on humans and fatalities. And those dogs will not be stopped by mace. And they have a jaw that clamps down, and once that jaw clamps down, it's like a vice. There is no getting that open 4 grown men cannot pry a pit bull off a child once that pit bull latches on and is enraged. I mean, you can shoot it and it still will just, in its death grip, hold on to that child. So all that to say, mace for low-level defense and a handgun if it becomes necessary, which would typically, I mean, in all the years that I have been a soul winner and that we have had a soul winning church, that has never become necessary, not even one time. With all our soul winning, nobody has ever had to draw a handgun and nobody has ever had to draw a mace. There have been a couple of instances of people getting bit by a dog, but it was not anything that was lethal force or even critical danger. Nothing like that. So I would say be prepared, but chances are you will never need it. It's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it, but I wouldn't be overly concerned about it. I'm running out of time fast here, and I apologize if I'm going over. I'm kind of torn between keep going and answer the rest of the questions, but I would be taking your time longer, or just cutting it off and not answering some people's questions, because the chances are I'm not doing this again for a couple of years. So I think I'm just going to keep going for now and see where it takes me. And feel free to tune out, and then maybe we'll chop this up into smaller sections. On that note, I'm hoping to do more videos, not a live Q&A, just more small video clips where I answer things, just because I haven't had time to blog. It's just hard with 9 children to take time away. My thoughts on foster care parenting. Is it wrong? I would very strongly discourage any Christian from participating in foster care. I know there are those who would disagree with me, Christians who think that it is their calling to participate and become foster parents. Reason being, well, if we don't become foster parents, then the worst of the worst people will become foster parents. And I can see that reasoning, so if that's your reasoning, fine. However, my opinion was asked, and my opinion is that by participating in the foster care system, you are becoming an enabler. Because if the Department of Children's Services did not have people lining up and willing for a buck to take children on, they would not be able to take these children in. And it is a wicked system. Those who truly should have their children taken from them are guilty of capital punishment. I mean, if somebody is molesting their child, that somebody should be executed. Their child is an orphan, and now it can be adopted. If somebody is smoking dope, and I have never done drugs, but if somebody is smoking dope, they should not lose their child over that. It's wrong, it's sinful, but that doesn't make them an unfit parent. So 90-some% of the things where people have their children taken away from them is over non-issues, that the child is worse off in foster care. There are countless statistics that show that children are more likely to be molested in a foster home than in their natural biological home. Simply because a non-parent is more likely to molest than a biological parent. So this whole system is just a horrible racket. It is intended to take children from their parents, place them with worse people. I'm not saying the parents aren't trashy or bad, but I'm saying they're placing them with even worse people. And, just so that the state can keep this machinery alive and make money. And it's horrible. I don't think any Christian should have any part in it. Next question, is it still normal for a 4-year-old to have temper tantrums almost every day? She's saying that he does this when he doesn't get his way. Spanking doesn't seem to work. He doesn't even cry. And now he's scared of sleeping alone. And sometimes he points at stuff and just says scary. First of all, no, it's not normal for any child to throw a temper tantrum. I mean, it's normal for them to try it once or twice. When you nip it in the bud, when it happens the first or second time, they just don't throw temper tantrums. I mean, it just doesn't happen. I have 9 children, and none of them are known to throw temper tantrums. It's just they try that once, and they push the button, and the light bulb didn't come on the way they wanted to. They're not going to keep pushing that button. The fact that when he doesn't get his way and he's 4 years old, he has uncontrolled anger. And that is destructive to his relationship with you as the mother. He should not just be allowed to exhibit his anger at you and by throwing a temper tantrum. And he's not learning to control himself. And spanking doesn't work. He doesn't even cry. You're not spanking right. If you spank the child, there is a pain associated with that. He will cry, and it will accomplish the job. On the rear end, of course, I'm not saying to abuse a child or mistreat them, but applying a spanking to their rear end, not a pummeling, but a stinging. So you want to, a paddle or whatever, to where you're not pummeling the child, but it's stinging the child, not through the diaper, because the only way to spank a child through a diaper is by pummeling them and misaligning their spine. If the spanking isn't working, you're not doing it right, because that's God's way that He intended, and it works. I'm moving on to the next question. A lady who, as a child, without her consent, was put on birth control pills. She has now been married for 3 years with no children, irregular cycles. Do I have any recommendations for natural ways to balance hormones and seeking help? Pardon me for 1 second. Hey, John, I've got the babies' bunny crackers if you want them. I'm going to toss them over by the door. So I would say consult with a midwife. You can get your hormonal panel, your blood panel worked on. There are natural things you can do to balance the hormones, yes. I have the baby's crackers there if you want crackers for her. They're behind the door. I tossed them wrong. Thanks, buddy. Let me know if you need anything, okay? So, and then another suggestion that somebody made was to chart the cycles. And that's a really helpful tip, because a lot of things you can work around if you chart the cycles. You can see if maybe your luteal phase is too short. That's a common problem that goes undiagnosed. The luteal phase is the time from ovulation until your new cycle starts. And if that's too short, 10 days or less, then even though you might be conceiving, the child does not have enough time to implant firmly in the uterus, and will be, it will perish when your cycle starts. So by tracking temperature and natural symptoms, you can see exactly when you're ovulating, things like that, and that will help to see if there's something off like that. I know after one of my pregnancies, my luteal phase was too short, and I had 2 miscarriages in a row because of that, where I would just find out I was pregnant and then, miscarry just within the week. And by getting that luteal phase bumped up through just simple teas and herbal things, that was remedied. So I would say work with a knowledgeable midwife or herbalist, get your blood work done, and go from there. And then also it typically takes however many years you were on birth control, that's how long you can expect it to take to reverse course again. Another pregnancy-related question. Do I normally decline ultrasounds and Doppler checks during pregnancies? Can they be harmful to the baby? God has put it on my heart to trust in Him and avoid these technologies unless absolutely necessary. What is my opinion on the matter? I do not decline the Doppler. I do not decline the ultrasound, especially if my midwife thinks it's necessary. Just with my history of, being a grand multipara now, and the past twin pregnancy, I will always do an early ultrasound around 7 weeks to check for a multiple pregnancy. And then if there are any indications of issues, if it's a singleton, then I would, if there are any indications of issues, check that out. If there's a question about, say, the placenta being too low, or I know one time I had an ultrasound because there was an issue, there was a question, I was hurt in an accident, And there was a question of whether that could have affected the placenta detaching, and it did not. But just things like that I would check for. So I think it depends on the case. I would definitely lean toward the ultrasound, not away from it, because there are many things that if you know about it from the womb can be remedied. I mean, just Boaz would not be alive if it hadn't been for an ultrasound. So you can trust in God and still seek medical care. The two are not exclusive of one another. Trusting in God does not mean that you have to be in the dark about what's going on. Okay, and then here's a question that has been asked before, but I will address it again. In an ideal world where everybody is Christian, who would ever become an OBGYN? Or do you think that such professions should be left to unbelievers? But in that case, wouldn't it be hypocritical to use their services when needed? Now, first of all, in an ideal world where everybody's a Christian, we don't live in an ideal world. It will never happen that everybody's a Christian. So this is a hypothetical that's impossible. So if we lived in an ideal world, we wouldn't need an OBGYN because giving birth would be as simple as, it is in the animal kingdom because there's no curse there. So that question is an incongruous question. In an ideal world, we wouldn't need OBGYNs, but we don't live in an ideal world, therefore we need OBGYNs. But yes, there are plenty of unbelievers that can fulfill those professions, and that's exactly what I think should happen. And no, I don't think it would be hypocritical to use their services. It would only be hypocritical if I said, well, I'm going to them for my religious help. I'm going to them for a service. I did not force them to learn to become a medical professional in whatever field that is, but let's stay here with OBGYN. So no, it's not hypocritical because it's not like, here I told them not to do it. I think in general, people should get saved and follow the Bible and stay home. But that doesn't mean that everybody's going to do that. So if they don't do that, that doesn't... It's like, I don't think Target should have their weird transgender bathrooms, but that doesn't mean that, no, I'm not shopping I'm not shopping at Target. I don't shop at Target, so that's a bad example, but it's not because of that I don't shop there. A company like, say, Amazon might have a policy in place of being pro-homo or something, and I'm sure they are. Should I not shop from them? I mean, if I made that my criteria, I could not even live. I would have to live out in the desert, off-grid, and just provide all my own stuff because we live in the world and therefore we use the world. It would only be hypocritical if I was going to them for my spiritual care, but I'm going to them for physical care, and that's what they wanted to do with their life. It's not a perfect world. I can use that to my advantage and not be wrong. Am I still using Azure Standard? Yes. What do I feel are good deals? It changes all the time. You just have to keep an eye on it. It used to be better than it is now, that's for sure. I used to order about twice as much. I only order about half as much now as I used to. Have I compared prices to Costco? Yes, Costco is great on organic stuff, so I get a lot of stuff there. Where can I find butter in bulk at an affordable price? I get my butter from Azure Standard because it's grass-fed. The organic butter at Costco is not grass-fed. They do have Kerrygold, which is grass-fed, but that's not really in bulk, so I don't have a good source for that. If you don't have Azure Standard in your area, I don't have a good source for that. At what age do I start disciplining my children, and what strategy do I use? The strategy I use is spankings. I don't do timeouts. I do some loss of privileges, more like a natural consequence, but predominantly, especially with the younger kids, which the question is about when do I start spanking. It's fast, it's easy, it works immediately. What age do I start? It depends. Of course, every child is different. When you know that the child is just intentionally being defiant and disobeying and does not want to yield his will to yours. Have I ever researched holistic dentistry? And if yes, what are my thoughts? So holistic dentistry, I'm going to tie this in with holistic medical care in general and naturopath. I think it's a crock. And no, I don't see a naturopath and I don't see a holistic dentist. Now, I have done both in the past. That's how I learned that it's a crock. And the reason for that is that if it's something that can be treated Here's the man. Do I need to cut it off? Do we need to take a vote here? I think I'm just going to finish the point I'm on, and then I'm going to wind it down for tonight. So holistic dentistry and naturopathic medicine. If it's something that can be treated naturally, you don't need them. Because you can research that on your own, and if you just want to use herbs and natural things, you can do that on your own. Whereas if usually you would need an allopath, because it's like the big guns, like you need steroids for your child's asthma. So I don't like to go to a naturopath, because it's like you have to twist their arm to give you, like I've gone to a naturopath and said, I know my child needs steroids. They're like, oh, I think you should try this homeopathic thing. And then I ended up in the hospital. So no, I prefer to go to a regular dentist and to go to a regular doctor, because I'm there to get the big guns and just tell them, no, I don't want the vaccines, and no, I don't want fillings that are amalgam based, and no, we don't want the fluoride. And I've always found them to be respectful of that and treat me courteously and abide by my wishes, whereas the naturopath, because you're kind of encroaching on their territory, when you tell them how you want things done, they're like, well, I'm the expert on how to be natural. I found them to be more abrasive, and I prefer to go to a regular doctor with the big guns and just, go there and order a la carte, as it were. And that's really the way to get the best medical care. Go to somebody who offers everything and only get the stuff that you want for yourself. So unfortunately, I'm going to wind it down. I've gone way over time, so I had about 10 more questions. Maybe I'll use these another time, and then also the text questions. So if you tuned in, thank you so much, and I hope to see you again soon. God bless you. I want to kind of park it on that for a minute, because I think that as wives, we can really hinder our husband's life and life's calling by being an overly attached, envious, jealous wife. Now, jealousy in and of itself is a good characteristic. I'm not saying not to be jealous of our spouses. But the level of jealousy that this comment is talking about, envy and insecurity due to the very sexualized world we live in, that's kind of taken it to an extreme, because of course Jesus said that he doesn't want us taken out of the world. He wants us to stay in the world. He just doesn't want us to be tainted by the world. So that we would keep ourselves from the evil in the world. And especially just, in light of things that have recently transpired, I think it is really destructive to a marriage for a wife to be overly jealous or envious, and to make herself too dependent on her husband. Now, a wife is to be the helper for the husband, not the other way around. So anytime we have a balance in life where the husband has to pander to the wife and he has to revolve his schedule around his wife so that she doesn't go off the rails mentally and emotionally and her insecurities, those roles are really reversed, where now it becomes the husband's job in life to make sure that his wife isn't going to lose the plot. So while jealousy in and of itself is a good attribute, we should be jealous of what we have, as in we want to be possessive of our spouse and not share them with another. No, that should not be taken to an extreme, and I think a far greater danger that I see in this day and age is women taking that too far, wanting to just keep their husband on a really short leash, dictating his life, dictating his schedule, manipulating him by, acting helpless and like they just need him for the most mundane aspects of life. I think there's a real danger there, and it will not be for the betterment of the marriage. I hope that answers that question. The fact that the comment mentions this overly sexualized world, a married man who is happily married is not just on the brink of committing adultery all the time. So since, let's talk about other lusts of the flesh, and like hunger or appetite. there's a righteous way to fulfill that. So, you know, to the hungry soul, every bitter thing is sweet. If you're really, really starved, something gross is going to start sounding good to you. I mean, if you haven't eaten in days and you come across McDonald's, you're probably going to want to buy it because it's going to sound appealing after 2 days of no eating. And it's kind of like that in marriage. If your husband is starved for physical affection and that aspect of marriage, there is a greater danger that he might tell what it is, but it's something that's behind the scenes. So just because it's not seen, because we are at home and because only our family reaps the fruits of our work, it is still very satisfying. That satisfaction and that contentment that comes from a job well done, even though it's just for our family, can still be there. So I would really encourage you, if you're struggling with staying home and you're struggling with contentment, use that time to advance yourself, advance yourself on an intellectual level and on a skill level, and it will contribute to your contentment. I'm going to check the tablet here real quick because it looks like somebody has sent me something. Okay, so somebody's asking about tongue ties. I'm going to shelve that for a minute just because there is a question about tongue ties, and I will talk about that in a little bit more detail. We were dealing with tongue ties in the last 6 months with 2 of our children. So I will mention that when I get to that question. And then another question about when and how I assign chores to my children. Which jobs do you assign? Is it gender specific? That's a wide-sweeping question. I do not assign any gender-specific chores. All of our kids learn to do all the chores because it's all basic things that everybody needs for life. Everybody needs to know how to operate a washing machine and a dishwasher, how to sweep a floor, how to sort laundry, how to, do basic care of a child, as far as getting them dressed for the day or getting them ready for bed or helping prepare a meal, just the day-to-day reading with a younger child. There's so many things that really both fathers and mothers should know. Therefore, I'm teaching them to my sons and my daughters. I don't have any gender-specific chores. There are children who enjoy certain chores more than others or are better at certain chores, so I'm not just in the business of making sure to assign the most undesirable chore to the child who hates that the most, but in general, everybody has to do everything and learn everything. And how that looks at my house will be different from how that looks at your house, because each of us has a different way of running a household, when our kids nap, what our resources and our circumstances are. So I have a lot of schedules for chores on my blog if you search for that, but really you would have to adapt it to your own needs, because your needs will be very different from my needs as far as what we have in our household. I'm going to go back to the questions online again, and one more time, that number, if you want to text in, is 623-666-2118, and that will pop up on a tablet here next to me. And this little girl is asleep. Anonymous said she has a 20-month-old baby girl that's very clingy. Hi everybody, I hope you can all hear me.
Dorothy.
I brought a little guest. Chloe, say hi. Say hi, Chloe. Yep, smile so big the passy falls out. So she should go to sleep here shortly, but I kept her up so she can say hi. Alrighty, so I have a long list of questions here that I printed out and marked up, but I also have a number. If you want to send in any additional questions, you can text me at this number, 623-666-2118. So I have that right in front of me here on my tablet, and you can text me at that number. Otherwise, I'm just going to go through with this. I know I didn't pick the phone number. I didn't even notice that until today that has 666 in it, so I didn't pick that. All right, so I'm going to just get right into the questions that were sent in on the blog after I get Chloe put on the breast for nap time. All right, so if you are following along with the questions on the blog, this is going back a couple of posts when I first announced the live Q&A. There's like 92 or 93 comments on that thread. I'm going through those in the order in which they were sent in. So if you can follow along there, that should be in the right order. All right, so I'm going to get started right here. This question came up about, do I ever deal with jealousy, envy, or insecurity due to the very sexualized world we live in? And a similar question later on that I'm going to answer with this one, just because it was so similar, dealt with the same thing with my husband traveling. Am I ever jealous about that? Seek to fulfill that, in unrighteous ways? Or that he would be more tempted, when he sees a woman and she's maybe dressed inappropriately or provocatively. There would be then more of a challenge of not letting that affect him. But most husbands are not just about to commit adultery and they're just one step away from adultery. There are a lot of other things wrong in the marriage besides just, these women being too scantily clad. So keeping the husband happy at home is a big step. And I'm not saying that if the husband commits adultery, that's the wife's fault, because it's not. But, that's just a good preventative measure in general. So I hope that answers that question. I'm moving on to the next question now. How did you get your heart's attitude right with being at home and the daily tasks of raising children, keeping the home? And this mom was asking because she said she does not feel satisfied and longs for different opportunities and struggles with contentment. And one commenter already responded, and I thought it was a very good answer, because the other lady already said that you can use any skills, even professional ones, in the sphere of influence of the home. And that is very, very true, and that's exactly what I was going to say, that even just because you're only staying home with your children, you can use those same skills at home to benefit your family as opposed to strangers and outsiders that are not part of your family. I know many moms that are expert cake decorators or expert at whatever they do, and in fact the fact that they do stay home with their children frees them up to be able to learn and advance. And I would strongly encourage any lady to always learn and work on improving yourself mentally and just in learning new skills. You have great intelligence and you can really make that work for you. You can pursue new hobbies and interests and just through reading new books, taking online courses, pursuing hobbies outside the home, and then really implementing that. For instance, I really enjoy baking, bread baking, and I've perfected my artisan bread baking to make loaves that you could buy from an artisan bakery if they were for sale, or in the sphere of cooking, maybe a high-end chef in town could prepare a steak dinner like I like to make. And I think that because it's not seen on the outside, sometimes we think those skills are lost. I recently took up a hobby. I'm not going to elaborate on. It's actually a professional branch that I'm taking an online course for that is a field that will greatly benefit in my husband's ministry. It's not anything that is seen. I'm not even talking about it on here in detail. Terrified if anyone else tries to talk to her or hold her, and mom is asking, should I give in to her every time she cries, or should I force her to go with other relatives? I would say never force your child to go with relatives or other people that they're not comfortable with. I'm not one who believes in giving kids what they're crying for, but this is a different area. This is if a child feels uncomfortable with certain people, I would never force them to go with those people, just because it sets a bad example of, if there is ever concern about a relative, they should be able to come to you and feel comfortable and know that you will back them up. They cannot be forced to physically go with somebody that they're not comfortable with, and that's an important lesson to teach them. Besides that, it will also just reinforce the insecurity that the child is already struggling with. So no, I would not force the child to go to other people and force that on them. The next question was asking about what type of work is Solomon doing? What age will he finish homeschooling? What can a young man like him do for work? So let me go through that one at a time. I don't want to talk about the specifics of his job, because I know there are people who would harass his workplace. So he is working in an office type environment, doing work on the computer. The laws are different in each state. In the state of Arizona, you're allowed to start work when you're 14. So you would want to look at the laws in your specific state. The child labor laws are different in every state. Even at age 14, there's only certain jobs that 14-year-olds are allowed to do, and there's very specific rules about what they can and can't do, what kind of machinery they can and can't operate. So you want to look into that. There was a funny story when Solomon was going around applying for jobs. He was applying at one place of business, and he had put on a schedule that he was not available on Sundays because we have church on Sundays. I mean, he didn't say that. He just said he wasn't available on Sundays. And the proprietor asked him, "Oh, you go to church?" And Solomon said, "Yes, I go to church. My dad's a pastor." And the man asked him, "Oh, what church is it?" And Solomon said, "Faithful Baptist Church in Tempe." And he's like, "Is that Pastor Anderson?" And Solomon was like, "Yes, that's my dad." And it turned out the gentleman had actually heard sermons, had listened to sermons online, and was local to our area. He goes to a different church in the area. There are actually a lot of people who listen to the sermons but go to different churches in the area. And he was thrilled, and he wanted to hire Solomon, but his boss over him said he had to wait until he was 15. So he